Good morning, and welcome to Daily 15. It's good to have you back. Today's Daily 15 is titled Thoreau on Walking. And unsurprisingly, it comes from a lecture written by Henry David Thoreau, an American philosopher from Massachusetts, titled Walking. The lecture itself is a sort of walk. And it's not a walk to, or at least it can feel this way, it's not a walk to anywhere in particular. So I think it'll be really helpful to try and make sense of it and to see if we can get a handle on what Thoreau is saying. If you'd like to join us, to read along yourself, or to talk about the today's Daily 15 with other people, you can head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15 if you're listening to this on the day it was released, or you can head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15 and navigate to the bookshelf to find today's Daily 15, which is titled Thoreau on Walking. If you'd like to join the conversation, you can head on over to community.alifeofthought.com. Remember, what I say here is not the final word. It's supposed to be the first word. So I hope you'll join me and others in saying a few more. That is, a few more words. With that being said, we can get started with the first paragraph. Thoreau begins, "My spirits infallibly rise in proportion to the outward dreariness. Give me the ocean, the desert, or the wilderness. In the desert, pure air and solitude compensate for want of moisture and fertility. The traveler Burton says of it, quote, 'Your morale improves, you become frank and cordial, hospitable and single-minded. ... In the desert, spirituous liquors excite only disgust. There is a clean enjoyment in a mere animal existence.' End quote. They who have been traveling long on the steppes of Tartary say, quote, 'On re-entering cultivated lands, the agitation, perplexity, and turmoil of civilization oppressed and suffocated us. The air seemed to fail us, and we felt every moment as if about to die of asphyxia. When I would recreate myself, I seek the darkest wood, the thickest and most interminable, and, to the citizen, most dismal swamp. I enter a swamp as a sacred place, a sanctum sanctorum.'" And just a note for you, sanctum sanctorum is like the holiest of holy places, a sort of a personal retreat. We continue. "There is strength, the marrow of nature. The wild wood covers the virgin mold, and the same soil is good for men and for trees. A man's health requires as many acres of meadow to his prospect as his farm does loads of muck. There are strong meats on which he feeds. A town is saved not more by the righteous men in it than by the woods and swamps that surround it. A township where one primitive forest waves above while another primitive forest rots below. Such a town is fitted to raise not only corn and potatoes, but poets and philosophers for the coming ages. In such a soil grew Homer and Confucius and the rest, and out of such a wilderness comes the reformer, eating locusts and wild honey." That's it for our first paragraph. Now, let's take a close look at it, because in one way, when you compare it to what we've looked at so far, this might feel a little less philosophical. Thoreau, at least, isn't making sort of outward philosophical claims about the nature of love or the nature of consciousness. But there's still philosophical work to be done here. So let's begin with our highlighted phrase. "There is a keen enjoyment," he says, "in a mere animal existence." Now, a modern reader that turns to Thoreau's text here is sure to find it beautiful. But they're almost just as sure to find it confusing. Yeah, that sounds good, but think about it for a second. There's a keen enjoyment in a mere animal existence. Or at the beginning, he says, my spirits infallibly rise in proportion to the outward dreariness. Why should this be? Why should our spirits rise in proportion to outward dreariness and not beauty or something like that? And I think our highlighted phrase, this talk of a mere animal existence, or really this exaltation of a mere animal existence, is the beginning of an answer. Now, this is what is sought, a mere animal existence in which a person becomes frank, cordial, hospitable, and single-minded. This supposedly then improves one's morale. And by morale here, we just mean their zeal or spirit or confidence. Now, why should this be? Why should an animalistic existence, a single-minded existence, improve our spirits? Here's where we have to guess a little, but I think it'll be in our favor. A first blush answer seems appealing. Perhaps our spirits have improved simply because we have less to think about. It will help here to make things a bit more concrete. So pull into your mind a state of fight or flight. Think about a time where you experienced something like this. Now, fight or flight is certainly a more animalistic way of navigating the world. That's sort of what we think about when we think about an animalistic way of living. In such a state, we do experience a sort of stress, right? That's why we're in the state in the first place. Our heart rate increases, and we sort of tunnel vision. We focus entirely on a single thing. But I think characteristic of such experiences is also a sort of calm. And it's not calm in the sense that my heart rate goes down, but because my vision is so constrained, I don't have to worry about as much. I've simply got to deal with this. And because it's not optional, and because this single thing, this object of my fight or flight response has a way of overtaking my life, it crowds out all of the other, perhaps smaller things that I normally worry about. I don't worry about them anymore because I'm focusing on this one big thing. A loved one is ill, and our attention turns entirely to taking care of them. We enter this sort of fight or flight state. We pass over other engagements, commitments, or things that we might have worried about. We simply do not have the time or the mental space to do otherwise. So, while we are stressed about one thing, it is simply one thing. And one can eventually come to feel that one's life has become more in her control because, the sort of scope of things to worry about has shrunken massively. And, you get to devote all of your attention to dealing with this one problem. I think this is part of the point of such a response in the first place, right? We tunnel in to one thing so we can deal explicitly and completely and entirely with that one thing. So back to Thoreau. Here is an initial guess. Perhaps the animalistic or wild life is appealing precisely because it is hard, and because one is focusing on the hard things, they are less inclined to focus on the less important other things which we so often worry about. And that brings us to our underlined phrase. Our underlined phrase feels like a bit of corroboration. He quotes these travelers, and they say, quote, "The air seemed to fail us, and we felt every moment as if we were about to die of asphyxia." This obviously does not sound very appealing, and this seems to support our highlighted interpretation. Being immersed in civilization is experienced as an asphyxia, an inability to breathe. You can't get a breath in. Of course, we might be inclined to understand this metaphorically. When someone says that they can't breathe, we sort of mean that there's simply so much that we have to do, so much that we have to worry about, that we do not have time to breathe. And so outward dreariness or wilderness and its characteristic problems for Thoreau offer us a sort of respite from this breathlessness. The problems are simpler and fewer in number, even if they still are there, still problems. They are such that one still has the time to breathe as she is trying to solve them. So we may feel certain our interpretation, our highlighted analysis was correct. The problems of natural or quote-unquote wild life are preferable to those of civilization. But it is here that we need to pause and turn to our circled phrase, because I think it puts a little bit of pressure on the interpretation that we were maybe inclined to make, or at least I was inclined, as the one walking through the paragraph, inclined to make at first. Okay, the quote. Thoreau says, "In such a soil grew Homer and Confucius and the rest, and out of such a wilderness comes the reformer eating locusts and wild honey." Now, what's crucial to notice is that our circled phrase does not seem to have much to do at all with simple problems or feelings of breathlessness, of asphyxiation. Rather, Thoreau seems to imply that there's something about wilderness which helped give rise to some of the great thinkers of humanity, of all time. Homer from the Greeks, and Confucius in China, and more generally, that there is a kind of freshness that wilderness provides, a freshness that inspires ideas of reform and change, and that if we forego wilderness, we'll also be foregoing these beautiful heights of philosophy and of reformation. Now, we may perhaps begin to make sense of this new piece of the puzzle by considering the fact that this is a lecture about walking. If you recall, that was the title. Yet none of the interpretation that we have done or engaged in thus far has had much to do at all with walking. We've considered notions of simplicity and the suffocating nature of civilization, but Thoreau here is not simply exalting nature. Instead, he is exalting a particular mode of engaging with nature, walking in it, appreciating meadows and wild and bush. And so we ought to ask how it is that walking or sauntering or meandering in nature releases one from their problems and allows her to consider the sorts of things that lead to reformation or lead to the creation of beautiful work, the work that Homer or Confucius would eventually create. Here is one possible answer. Thoreau calls swamp and wilderness more generally a sanctum sanctorum, a place, essentially, of holy retreat. Perhaps, then, it is our ability to walk into wilderness, to meander, to saunter in search of this holy, private, and personal retreat that allows us to think clearly in the ways that Homer and Confucius must have, and also to be unencumbered or to become unencumbered by the normal everyday thoughts that take our breath away and weigh down on us and leave us unable to do that creative, thoughtful, and deep work which, if our actions are to have any lasting or meaningful impact, we must embark upon. And this brings me to our second paragraph. To preserve wild animals, Thoreau says, implies generally the creation of a forest for them to dwell in or resort to. So it is with man. 100 years ago, they sold bark in our streets peeled from our own woods. In the very aspect of those primitive and rugged trees, there was, methinks, a tanning principle, which hardened and consolidated the fibers of men's thoughts. Ah, I already shudder for these comparatively degenerate days of my native village, when you cannot collect a load of bark of good thickness, and we no longer produce tar and turpentine. If only we had another 15 minutes. But with that being said, that's all we have for today. If you'd like to mark the second paragraph up yourself, head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15. Or if you'd like to join the conversation, because remember, my word is not supposed to be the final one, it's supposed to be the first one, head over to community.alifeofthought.com. Remember, accounts are free, so you could just join us and comment. The source of today's excerpt, Thoreau's lecture on walking, is available for free online if you just look it up. There's also a citation provided below with everything that you should need to find it. And with that being said, I'll see you next time. Have a good day.